Ninja Gaiden Ragebound is coming out this week, can you believe it? To celebrate, we've spent all of July looking at Ryu Hayabusa's impact on both the critics and the industry. We've already touched on the 8-bit trilogy, the handheld spin-offs, and even those weird ports that found their way to other consoles. Now it's time to finally dive headfirst into the 3D series, including the 2004 reboot, Ninja Gaiden II, Ninja Gaiden III, Ninja Gaiden Dragon Sword, and even the much-maligned 2014 spin-off Yaiba Ninja Gaiden Z. Yeah, those are definitely Ninja Gaiden games. Are any of them actually worth playing? To answer that question, I decided to flip through the pages of Electronic Gaming Monthly, Edge, Game Informer, and more classic magazines that reviewed these games back when they first came out. So get ready to pull out those 10-hit combos because you're gonna need them in this episode of Ninja Gaiden Review Crew.
Here's one for all you ninja guys then on 86
From the makers of Dead or Alive comes the greatest action game of all time, Ninja Gaiden. Rated M for mature. Unleash your inner ninja.
Oh, I'll take a pound of that.
Xbox is good to play together.
After the commercial success of the Ninja Gaiden trilogy on the Nintendo Entertainment System, many expected that Tecmo would give Ryu Hayabusa a 16-bit makeover on the Super NES. But that did not happen. We also didn't get a 32-bit sequel, though Ryu did find his way into the Dead or Alive fighting franchise. In a move that frustrated fans from around the world, Tecmo decided to wait until 2004 to reboot the series on the Xbox. That's a 12-year gap between releases. Now let me tell you, the hype was real. This was more than just a brand new game from a beloved franchise, but it was also one of the most important console exclusives on the original Xbox. This game was a big deal, and the critics expected big things from this long overdue installment. But did it live up to those lofty expectations? Yes, absolutely. Of course it did. This is one of those games where the range in score goes from 90% all the way up to a perfect 100%, as you're going to find as we hone into Electronic Gaming Monthly, who sits right in the middle with an average score of 9.5 out of 10. Shane gushed that it's as good as you hoped it would be. Hell, it's actually better. With one stylish katana slash, Ninja Gaiden slashes its way to the top of the action genre. And it's not all about graphics. Well, okay, it is, in part. It's tough to even find fault in such a polished game, but I did suffer a few unnecessary deaths due to the occasional obtuse camera angles. Also, too many of the puzzles follow the absurd find the handle to turn the crank mold. Regardless, this is an unmissable instant classic that completely deserves your time and money. CJ agreed. Merriam-Webster, it's time to revisit the entry for Kick-Ass and tack on also see Ninja Gaiden. The visuals strike the first blow, but the minute you decide to stop smelling the flowers and strike back, you begin to see that it isn't just a pretty picture. Gaiden's gameplay is equally well crafted, with responsive controls that demand fighting game caliber reflexes. It's nail-bitingly tough, but it's extremely rewarding since it forces you to hone your ninja skills. The game's only flaw is the lame duck camera, which makes battling groups of enemies more difficult than it should be. Even so, no Xbox should go without Gaiden. Now if you want to see the so-called low score, then, well, you might be disappointed. Computer and Video Games went a little bit lower than EGM, giving the reboot a 9.3 out of 10, and then there's just a massive pileup, with the rest of the magazines giving Ninja Gaiden a 9 out of 10. That's the score that GMR gave the game in their 16th issue, as well as Xbox Nation in their 19th. Edge also went in with a 9 out of 10, summing it up this way. To applaud Ninja Gaiden for being hard is to miss the point, not least because there are portions of the game that aren't. The point is that the fluidity of movement that felt so groundbreaking in Prince of Persia only a few months ago is something that Gaiden supplies with almost contemptuous ease. The point is the dozens of things that are done so well that you don't even notice them happening. The perfectly judged auto-aim, the sound design packed with information and atmosphere. The point is that while it could be argued that no game has the right to demand of you what Gaiden does, few other games offer such exceptional riches in return. Moving back up the scale, we see Game Informer agree with Electronic Gaming Monthly's 9.5 out of 10. The official Xbox magazine went a tick higher, giving it a 9.6 out of 10. And then there's GamePro, who does the most GamePro thing ever, and that's give it a perfect 5 out of 5. Highly skilled players may be able to finish the game quicker, but the majority of folks will clock in for a 20+ hour thrill ride. Few games are this good for so long and keep you coming back for more. Ninja Gaiden is truly outstanding. While it might not command the same goodwill these days, Ninja Gaiden was a genuine force when it was released in 2004. With an overall average of 94%, that puts this 3D reboot in the same category as games like Halo and Ocarina of Time. That also makes it the highest scoring Ninja Gaiden game, at least so far. Let's see if Ninja Gaiden Dragon Sword can top that. After earning high scores on the Game Boy, Game Gear, and even the Lynx, Ninja Gaiden didn't return to a handheld console until 2008 with the release of Dragon Sword on the Nintendo DS. Set somewhere between the first and second entries in the reboot timeline, this was a 3D action game that used the system's unique capabilities to craft a Ninja Gaiden game that was like no other. You see, this is a game that didn't just use the dual screen setup, we actually had to turn the system on its side and then tap on the screen to take out the enemies. It's really the kind of game that could only exist on the DS. Let's see if that had any impact on the scores. Now, instead of starting with Electronic Gaming Monthly like we so often do, let's shake things up a little bit by going to the bottom of the scale and checking in with Edge, who gave Dragon Sword a solid score of 7 out of 10. They were impressed that it used the console's touchscreen in a unique way, but argued that it's not quite sublime. It loves to defy expectations of a handheld title, loading itself with all the moves, magic powers, and textures of the console game, retaining even things it could really do without. Some of its larger fiends delight in lunging, taking you down and molesting you for a few seconds, savaging the game's hard-fought rhythm. And it's tough. Its learning curve almost flat, but its difficulty curve exponential. The wave of enemies growing larger and more frequent between checkpoints. In the meantime, though, it at least makes time for some jocular microphone action and dialogue, proving that if there's a gossamer thin line between gimmick and game on DS, Nintendo isn't alone in seeing it. This is Team Ninja's finest, most intelligent game since Ninja Gaiden Black. It leaves high hopes for the imminent 360 sequel. Moving on up the scale, we see Game Informer give the side story a solid 7.75 out of 10, while GamePro went a bit higher, giving the game a 4 out of 5. Team Ninja is known for making games that really test the limits of a system's hardware, and Dragon Sword is no exception. As a standalone DS game, Ninja Gaiden Dragon Sword is an amazing adventure, almost at the level of The Legend of Zelda Phantom Hourglass. While Dragon Sword's light is diminished by the shadow of the near-perfect console counterpart, it's still a perfect way to help pass the time until Ninja Gaiden 2 arrives. On the top of the pile, we have Nintendo Power, who gave this DS game a very strong 8.5 out of 10, and then there's also Maxim Magazine that gave it a perfect 5 out of 5. But seriously, who cares what Maxim has to say? Let's go ahead and check in with Electronic Gaming Monthly, who gave Dragon Sword an average score of B+. Matt explained that Dragon Sword is too good. Somehow, Team Ninja removed the series' hardcore barrier without making the game overly easy and created controls as polished as they are ballsy. My biggest complaint? Just as the game gets comfortable experimenting with more than slicing up enemies, it ends. If it had more variety and a story that felt less like fan fiction, it'd be competing with console action games. Nick agreed. I agree that it's an impressive accomplishment that Dragon Sword makes the transition with most of its finely tuned ninja luster intact. It's easy to appreciate the speedy, satisfying touchscreen combat, even if it's disappointing to see so much recycling after the novelty wears off. But while the basic mechanics are aces, I found all of the other touchscreen functionality to be stupidly simplistic. It's fun while it lasts though, particularly the boss battles, and will hopefully pave the way for more original DS action. With strong scores across the board, I'm surprised Tecmo didn't continue to experiment with the touchscreen Ninja Gaiden games. And not just on the Nintendo handhelds, but also cell phones and tablets. This really could have been a big series. But alas, it was one and done for Dragon Sword. Honestly, that's a shame, because with an overall average of 84%, it's easily one of the critics' favorite Ninja Gaiden games.
バカ野郎すげえでなんかうざいうざいうざいうざい何こいつ超強い忍者ガイデン2エクマ
4 years after the Ninja Gaiden reboot sliced up the original Xbox, Tomonobu Itagaki was back for the long-awaited sequel, which would also prove to be the final Ninja Gaiden game that he ever worked on. This time, an Xbox 360 exclusive, Ninja Gaiden 2 shakes up the formula by making everything a lot more brutal, with Ryu using his various blades to slice and dice his way through the competition in the most gruesome ways possible. This is a darker and more mature Ryu Hayabusa, and Itagaki hoped that you'd be ready for it. The fans certainly were. What about the critics? After being blown away by the 2004 reboot, I think it's fair to say that the critics were disappointed by Ninja Gaiden 2. Electronic Gaming Monthly, for example, went from giving the first game a near-perfect score to giving the sequel a lowly B rating. Nick praised the attention that was given to tightening up the combat, but has a list of issues a mile long. The awful camera compounds those problems. It drags along behind you like a wounded dog and wanders off on its own when you need it the most. Its puzzles occupy a familiar corner of time wasting, with minimal backtracking to, say, open up a door that you couldn't open 30 seconds ago. Bosses are horribly inconsistent in their difficulty. It's dismaying that these elements are simply brushed aside under the assumption that the combat can support the weight of the entire experience. When things click, it most certainly does. But it's an otherwise inconsistent package with almost as many frustrations as satisfactions. Shane agreed, concluding that more and more, it's apparent that Team Ninja's concept of cool involves marching out a parade of massively endowed doll-like women and rubber-suited monstrosities that Rita Repulsa might have sent against the Power Rangers. But even if these tacky trappings make Ninja Gaiden 2 feel like a guilty pleasure, its refined gameplay warrants a purchase for gamers craving a challenge. As you'd expect, the score took a similar slide over at GamePro, who went from giving the original a perfect 5 out of 5 to giving this game a mere 4 out of 5. The same thing over at Edge, who went from a 9 down to an 8. They complained about the camera and the narrative and the bosses, explaining that taken as a whole, these issues obviously add up. But it's important to emphasize that they never wholly detract from the greatness of the combat. Rightly or wrongly, they're part of the experience. None of this excuses a fundamental fault in design, of course, and one for which Team Ninja, well versed in the Ninja Gaiden franchise, really has no excuse. To win on a negative note would be to do the game a disservice, however. Ninja Gaiden 2 is a fascinating and hugely replayable game that shows Team Ninja has a gift beyond the vast majority of developers in the genre. And it shows something wider. In terms of mainstream video games, and for all that Microsoft needs the support and attach rates of so-called hardcore gamers, the truth is, hardcore gamers need Microsoft more. Much more. Now you're going to notice a trend as we continue to climb up the scale. No matter how high the score is, everybody seems to be a little bit down on Ninja Gaiden 2. There's just an apologetic tone throughout many of the reviews. We see that in the official Xbox Magazine review, where they gave it an 8.5 out of 10, and it even shows up in Game Informer's review, and they're at the top of the list, giving it an 8.75 out of 10. Like a bottle of moonshine in your grandmother's cabinet, whenever the game isn't focusing on the action, it feels like a game from a forgotten era of gaming. Contextual control issues sometimes arise, making it difficult to do simple things, like shimmying along a pipe. The platforming elements, such as running along and climbing walls, can be touchy, and we noticed a few loading issues too. The game still follows the tired pattern of find key A to open locked door B, and the story's about as unnecessary as a tomato fruit roll-up. If you're willing to put up with those few annoyances, Ninja Gaiden will show you a great time. But let's hope that Team Ninja adds a few more flavors to the mix next time it stirs the pot. Oh yeah, don't worry. Team Ninja is definitely going to be changing up the formula in the next game, but you should probably curb your enthusiasm. When it comes to Ninja Gaiden 2, the reviews are definitely down compared to the first game. We've gone from a 94% down to an 83% in just 4 years. And spoiler alert, the free fall is just starting to pick up speed. Yeah, you'll see what I mean. With Itagaki gone and another frustrating 4-year wait, many Ninja Gaiden fans wondered what direction Tecmo would take the series next. In a move that disappointed a lot of the core fans, they decided to make the series a lot more accessible, which meant making the stage designs more linear, simplifying the combat, and adding as many quick-time events as possible. There are just so many. While it certainly still has its defenders, it's clear that these choices angered the fan base and effectively stopped the mainline series dead in its tracks for more than a dozen years. But hey, let's see what the critics thought of Ninja Gaiden 3. Now, before we dive into the scores, I want to point out that this is the first Ninja Gaiden game that Electronic Gaming Monthly has failed to review since the very first game. And that was all the way back in 1989. With no EGM to kick around, I guess the next best thing is Game Informer, who gave the sequel a very disappointing 6 out of 10. Ninja Gaiden 3 is not a complete train wreck, but it suffers from a multitude of problems. The action can be fast-paced and engaging at times, but many design decisions significantly bring down the experience. Lacking AI, a limited arsenal, the series' notoriously difficult camera, no inventory currency system, and an incoherent story combine to make this the most disappointing title in the series. For what it's worth, Game Informer 6 out of 10 was the lowest score of the bunch. The PlayStation Official Magazine UK, for example, went a full point higher, giving it a 7 out of 10. The official Xbox Magazine also had a lot of the same complaints as the other critics, but they did find a way to soften the blow. If all this reads like an evisceration of a horrible game, that's definitely not the case. It's a matter of context. Compared to its predecessors, Ninja Gaiden 3 is a noticeable step back, due largely to the gameplay decisions that are taken out of your hands. Stacked up against its contemporaries, however, it still stands among the finest fast action experiences on the Xbox. Given the rare and tumultuous circumstances that led to such a turnover at Team Ninja, it's fair to wonder what Itagaki's Ninja Gaiden 3 would have been like. Still, this version of Ninja Gaiden 3 is what we get, and it deserves praise for being a great way an Xbox fan can spend $60. It may not live up to the series' impossibly high standards, but it's still a gem in its own right. OXM gave the game a score of 8 out of 10. Look, with even the recommendations sounding a bit tepid, it's clear that the critics were disappointed with this third installment. The overall score was a mere 70%, making this the worst reviewed game of not only the 3D reboots, but of all of the Ninja Gaiden games, including the Game Gear game and that crappy Ninja Gaiden trilogy on the Super NES. That's the bad news. The good news is that we still have one more game to get to, and it's Yaiba, Ninja Gaiden Z, so, it might not be on the bottom for long.
Ninja Gaiden II!
After seeing the poor critical and consumer response to Ninja Gaiden 3, Tecmo decided to go in a new direction. Yaiba, Ninja Gaiden Z, is a spin-off that was released in 2014, allowing it to take big chances on not only the gameplay, but also the characters and the setting and everything else. For starters, we're now on Earth 14, a planet that is currently in the middle of a zombie outbreak. This allowed developer Spark Unlimited a chance to make Ninja Gaiden more about the fast-paced gameplay where you're fighting off hordes of enemies in a futuristic world. That's not necessarily a bad idea, but many fans complained that this was just too far removed from the Ninja Gaiden that they knew and loved. Let's see what the critics said. While we've certainly seen review scores dip slightly over the years, this right here is where the Ninja Gaiden series absolutely craters. I mean, even with the worst games in the series, there was always at least one defender. That's not the case when it comes to Yaiba. The highest score you're going to find in an English language magazine is Game Informer, which gave it what I'm going to call an incredibly generous 6.5 out of 10. Battles get increasingly frustrating the deeper you go. Enemies take and dish out a lot of damage, and your starting health bar is small. This, paired with the unreliable counter system and the mid to high tier enemies that rarely get stunned by your attacks, means you're forced to dart around constantly, chipping off a little damage or risking heavy retaliation. When you die, you have to stare at a lengthy load screen and start all the way over at the very first wave, no matter how far you progressed in that arena. Like its second fiddle protagonist, Yaiba in Ninja Gaiden 3 resides in the shadow of many other better third-person action games. But it's not terrible if you're specifically looking for a schlocky Saturday. Like I said, Game Informer looks incredibly generous compared to all the other reviews. For example, the official Xbox magazine ended up giving Yaiba a pitiful score of 4 out of 10. The PlayStation official magazine UK went even lower, giving it a 3. There are bizarre flashes of quality. Yaiba's moveset, some of its voice acting, and the visual design seems to be just visiting from another, better game. But even these wear off on the 20th attempt at the same horrifically designed arena fight. And Yaiba's staggering failure to create a coherent camera, combat finesse, likable characters, interesting levels, or even playable platforming sequences is unforgivable. Yaiba is guilty of the most heinous crime, greeting difficulty not with precision combat, but with myriad bork design calls and some utterly broken camera work. Yeah, that's not exactly a ringing endorsement. This really was the low point for the franchise. And what made it even more frustrating is that it seemed to be the end of the line for Ninja Gaiden. Yaiba was the game that killed the franchise, at least for a decade. Now, 11 years later, Ninja Gaiden is finally back on track, thanks to both Ninja Gaiden Ragebound and Ninja Gaiden 4, proving that it's going to take a lot more than a really bad game to stop the Hayabusa clan.
Ninja Gaiden 2!
Hey, thanks for watching me break down these classic reviews. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we post new episodes just like this one every time classic games get added to modern consoles. And if you still want more Ninja Gaiden, you should check out the past couple of episodes where we've basically covered every game in the series. Now, here's the question I have for you. What's the best 3D Ninja Gaiden game? Now, I'm going to assume that most people aren't going to say Ninja Gaiden 3 or Ninja Gaiden Z. but I suspect that there are some hardcore fans for Ninja Gaiden 2, especially since it just got a re-release. Also, probably a lot of love out there for the DS game, which really shook up the formula in a fun way. I'm actually really excited to see your picks in the comments below. In other news, we're going back later this week with more reviews and, I'm assuming, a Nintendo Classics Review Crew. I mean, this does seem like the week when they would drip out another GameCube announcement. While you wait for that, I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.